The discussion around Nintendo this past year has been dominated by talk about their next console.
For the sake of clarity, we'll call this Switch 2. But please, for the love of God, do not let it be called Switch 2. It's a really bad name.
The big questions are all around how powerful it'll be, when it'll come out, launch titles, backwards compatibility.
But no one's asking the most important question. Why? Why replace this wonderful video game machine, this magnificent engine of fun?
So we thought we'd be the ones to suggest, just don't. Don't replace it. Let Switch continue to thrive on its own terms.
We've been thinking about the Switch all wrong. Rather than killing a system that's still successful, Nintendo could take a cue from arguably the most successful system they ever made, the Game Boy.
You know how Nintendo's handhelds were always about 2 generations behind their consoles? That's not because the handhelds started late. It's because the Game Boy lasted 3 generations.
All told, the 8-bit Game Boy had continued success for 12 years. And this is through the 90s, when game consoles were updated about every 5 years. It started in the NES era and lasted all the way to the end of the N64 era, before they replaced it with Game Boy 2.
That was actually called Game Boy Advance.
Oh, you're right, because Nintendo doesn't give their systems terrible names. Don't call it Switch 2.
It's a very bad name.
Switch 2 is an awful name for a game system.
But how did Game Boy endure for so many years? It's actually really simple. It was cheap, and people liked it. All their competitors could offer was more expensive alternatives with more power. You know, like Home Improvement used to say. More power! Woof, 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 woof.
Exactly. And Nintendo was more like Home Improvement's wife on that show, whatever her name was. She had the extremely famous catchphrase, "Less power allows for a lower price point which appeals to a broader consumer base." She said it all the time.
I think her name was Jill. Jill Improvement.
The Game Boy's novelty plus its low price point meant that it was everywhere. Everybody had a Game Boy, so publishers never stopped making games for it. The Switch is in a similar situation, and 6 years in, people are still loving it.
The common argument is that the Switch isn't powerful enough to handle the newest games. Game Boy was never powerful enough to handle the latest and greatest games, and that system's software library is incredible. And currently, there aren't any gameplay experiences that the Switch can't handle. And no, God of War cutscenes are not a gameplay experience.
And even if the other consoles pull ahead and become far more powerful, that just means the Switch ports would be new games, like the Game Boy Color versions of Rayman or Metal Gear Solid.
That's just more games. There are a whole series of 2D Croc and Turok games exclusive to the Game Boy, and they're really good.
So if there's no major downside to sticking with the Switch for Nintendo or for the players, why does anybody need a Switch 2? Regular Switch is doing great. And Switch 2 really is a horrible name.
It's like negative creativity.
Bad effort. 0 out of 10 name.
Look, I know Sony does it with the PlayStation, but it's bad there too. Don't just slap a number on the end of your new game console and call it a day. Don't do that. Just come up with real names for your game systems. I don't think I'm being unreasonable to expect the slightest bit of creativity here.